Critics say Biden and the woke mob are taking a swipe at Christians this Easter. This year, Easter Sunday falls on Transgender Visibility Day, which is traditionally on March 31st. But this year, not only did Fairfax County, Virginia, make an official proclamation for Easter Sunday, so did President Biden.
To celebrate the day of trans visibility in and of itself is an affront to Christianity, because the Bible says that God made man and he made woman. He made male and female. To say otherwise is to deny the truth, is to deny God's creation.
That God made us in his image and likeness, male and female, and demons want to convert us to worship them by being non-binary, transgender, and on a fluid spectrum of sex, gender, and sexuality. The entire force in our culture, I'm telling you, is Baal and Ashtra trying to pull people to be like demons, not like God made them.
The battle between an aggressive homosexual agenda and the faith community here in Canada is far from over. But many Christian leaders say it may be the issue that causes a once sleeping church to rise up and be heard.
There's nothing sexual about this. It's like, yeah, right. You're dressing up in lingerie before your mirror at home, tucking your dick between your legs, imagining you have a vagina for a sexual kick. Oh, there was nothing sexual about that. Yeah, right. Bloody absolute liars. Now,
the struggle between the LGBTQ community and Christianity has existed for a long, long time now. If you've come here for a broad discussion on the gay community and its relationship with Christian theology in our modern culture, then I actually have some bad news, because we're not going to be doing that today. But the good news is that I already did it, and there's a video with that in mind. If you're curious about the ways in which Christianity has historically dealt with homosexuality, and what I personally believe about the verses that have traditionally been used to rebuke non-heteronormative sexualities, then I would encourage you to go back and watch that video. That older video is a great dive into the intricacies of how religion and sexuality mix when it comes to the way that we translate and understand specific parts of Scripture. But one of the things we did not dive into is this current obsession of the church with the non-sexuality-based side of the LGBTQ community. And that would be primarily focused on how the church deals with gender.
And we are seeing the results of that now, because some kids are reacting very emotionally and saying, and they're in fear. Will I suddenly struggle with feeling like a different gender inside of my body? No.
Carrie Simpson of Culture Guard, another leading opponent, calls the curriculum nothing short of child abuse.
Recently, the conservative evangelical church has become obsessed with the specific category of people in our country that identify as trans. For some reason, trans people have stood out, even amongst the rest of the LGBTQ community, for being particularly despicable by religious worldviews. But why is that the case? Even if you were the most staunch conservative, both socially and sexually, there is no real religious reason to shame people with the desire to transition genders. Which means that the reality of the scenario is simply that the people who are lambasting the trans community are doing so because they kind of just want to. Unlike the referendum from religious groups on gay and lesbian people, the intense worries about trans people have no strict or direct backing from Scripture to help address it. This means that while the evangelical community can rely on the 4 or 5 pieces of Scripture which are taken out of their cultural context to attack homosexual couples, and again, go back to the other video if you need more explanations of this, there are actually 0 verses that can be used inside or outside of its cultural context to address trans people directly. Well, except for this one verse that seems to be against cross-dressing, but that verse is so completely non-relevant that the only way you could use it and have me take you seriously is if you were being so literal that you were suggesting that we were all going to have to continue to wear Hebrew traditional dress all the time, and that's obviously stupid, so I'm going to move on from that. Because there is no sentiment from Scripture that is either pro or against trans people, or any people that choose to transition their gender, that means you're left with little recourse except to twist other sections of Scripture to create problematic meanings that do not exist. For instance,
we cannot just conform to what the society says and say, oh, well, there's multiple genders and, you be you. And for me, I'm going to do the binary thing, male or female. But for you, you can identify. No. If you are a Christian and you're watching this video, there is no wiggle room here. We have to take a firm stance and say that because God said that he created them male and female, Genesis 1:27, there are no other genders. Gender is equivalent to sex. Will this offend people? Yes, but we as believers must first and foremost stand before God and make sure that we're giving account for what we're standing on.
Genesis 1, which is of course the first creation narrative in Scripture, states simply that God created humans in his image. Male and female, God created them. This is a specific call out of a gender binary, and it makes most evangelicals wrinkle their eyebrows in disdain of anything that would suggest that gender can be transitioned, when Scripture here seems to suggest that God creates people with a specific gender in mind. However, the idea that people cannot switch or transition gender has no bearing on this scripture. After all, God created lots of binaries. For instance, God created day and night. Those two things are not static and unchanging. In fact, quite the opposite. Day transitions to dusk and then changes further into the night. Even when God directly creates different categories for the types of animals that exist in different environments, meaning he created fish for the sea and birds for the air, and he creates all these land creatures for the ground, that does not mean that the other categories cannot fit in the gray areas. Meaning that, after all, amphibians also exist. All creation changes in different ways, and nothing requires us to see all of creation only within the exact literal words used to describe their original creation. Further, the creation narrative, especially in Genesis 1, is not a historical retelling of any particular perfect example of how God made everything. It's highly allegorical, and it's not meant to be taken literally, ever. In fact, even in ancient times, Hebrew people did not claim that all of creation was enacted exactly as it was written in Genesis 1. And we have proof of that, after all, because Genesis 2 comes right after Genesis 1. And if you're not familiar, Genesis 2 is a completely different creation story that does not match the first. And also, we know that people are born intersex. Those people exist from birth because God created them that way. What do you suppose God would want you to do with those people? Just flip a coin? Surely just because Genesis only calls out males and females, that doesn't mean that intersex creation is from some other non-holy source, right? And lastly, these verses are an allusion to God's creation of two different biological sexes. It has nothing to do with the societal constructs of gender or gender identity or gender norms. The culture by which we express gender roles today is so vastly and completely different from the way that ancient Israel in 5000 BCE also expressed their own gender norms that it's useless to compare. Like, why would we compare them so literally? They are different cultures. So maybe we should stop doing that, because the people that do sound pretty stupid.
Not only was it gross, but it was not natural.
So while the Christian community in the US might try to use these more abstract verses like the one I just went through to speak on the existence or lack thereof of trans people and their understanding of sex and gender, these scriptures have no real relevance to the discussion. In fact, even if you read them in the most literal way possible, which is how evangelicals typically read the same types of verses on homosexuality, wherein we think about the potential consequences of men lying with men or whatever, they can still easily be framed correctly by just understanding what the rest of Scripture says about similar false dichotomies. So, when you have no real scriptural basis to actually bash trans people like you would like to, what tools do you actually have left? Well, what you see is that you just have to resort to cultural religious demonization. That's all. Just like we saw the early church and the Roman Empire attempt to use religion to characterize Jewish people as the killers of their Messiah, we see modern Christians attempt to characterize trans people as the killers of the family unit and groomers of children, despite the overwhelming evidence that that is not really happening.
And so many people who are afraid to address the evil, the dysphoria, the dysfunction. I'm not afraid to address the dysphoria or the dysfunction. The Lord rebuke you, Satan, and all of your demons and all of your imps who come and parade before us. That's right, I called you demons and imps who come and parade before us and pretend that you are part of this world.
That is quite a fiery statement there. Shortly after the bill was advanced, Barnaby apologized. But then, in response to a tweet with video of what he said about trans people, he tweeted, quote, "I am proud to stand by my entire statement, including my apologies."
With this type of mindset, you're forced to combat trans people who, again, have no real reason to be rebuked by Christian theology because of any scriptural basis, by claiming that in order to subvert normative conservative culture, you are also subverting or attacking normative American culture in general. This is a classic line that you hear all the time from Christian nationalists. Every time you see a post railing against progressive social policies that would dare alter the social makeup of our country, they come back with the same basic thought process. If gay people want to raise kids, they'll say that it's an attempt to make those kids gay. If brown immigrants are close to outnumbering white citizens, they'll claim that it's an attempt to replace Christianity with Islam. And so when trans people are becoming accepted by the culture, they lie and say trans people are pedophiles and they want to get into opposite gendered bathrooms to be sexual deviants.
There is no mystery to the transness of Avery, Phoenix, Lena, or Jay, or any trans child. In Avery's case, his mother has, it would seem, very clearly imposed a trans identity onto him. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a known mental illness where a parent, usually a mother, pretends that their child is sick or sometimes even causes the child to be sick in order to gain sympathy and attention for themselves from the public. If the psychiatric industry was at all honest and trustworthy, Debbie would be diagnosed with this disorder and her children removed from her care for their own safety.
These are textbook pseudo-religious arguments, and they actually reveal nationalistic or conservative political ideology as the ultimate end goal, rather than attempting to preserve any sort of faith-based understanding of what Jesus might have actually wanted us to focus on. In every situation where these types of arguments are made, especially in religious settings, they are brought up only because there is no true educated theological opinion that is trustworthy. In fact, in general, any argument that starts with a presumption of thinking that any social change is an automatic attack on a particular religious belief system are going to be faulty. Not every single idea that challenges you is an attack on all of your beliefs, unless you are so simple-minded that you can't bother to think about your beliefs abstractly.
But the excesses of empathy can actually destroy societies.
Yeah, I can
create these. It can create these contradictions. So, who supports homosexuality the most tends to be women. Who supports transgender kids, transition, all that, that insanity tends to be women. One of the most reliable voting blocks for Democrats is actually college-educated white women.
Right. It's issues like these that cause so much friction between evangelicalism and minority groups, and it really does a lot of damage to the church as well as the entire religion of Christianity overall. There is no place for outright rebukes of things that do not actively harm you or others. And yes, these people will say that trans people are pedophiles, and they will say that they are trying to increase the number of trans kids that exist. But here's the thing. We've seen this exact principle 1,000 times. More people will be a part of the LGBTQ community as people become more aware of the LGBTQ community, and as they gain support from our culture. That does not mean that there is some kind of psyop to turn people trans. Yes, a lot more kids are going to be questioning their gender. But guess what? If they are not trans, then they will not transition. It's as simple as that. No one is forcing their beliefs onto children in such a direct way. Well, except for the church. But my point is, just as we saw increases in the number of left-handed people after we stopped forcing all kids to be right-handed growing up, we will also see increases in the number of trans kids as we learn to accept them as people rather than outcasts. This also highlights an issue in the way in which we do theological thinking. In theology, we take things like scripture and tradition, and we compare and contrast and understand those things both inside and outside of our own cultural understandings, as well as the cultural understandings of parts of scripture. This means that we must consider factual evidence that we have learned along with scripture when deciding what to do with issues that affect other people. We don't just consider our own emotional responses. Right now, the science is pretty overwhelming. Trans people do exist, gender dysphoria is real, and there aren't any real documented negative mental health effects to embracing elements of gender-affirming care, especially when done under a doctor's supervision. The only real negative mental health effects that trans people seem to be exhibiting come from when they are bullied or outcast or literally murdered just for existing in a society that refuses to accept them as people. It's important to understand that as Christians, it is completely normal to take scripture seriously. What is abnormal, however, is to claim that things are paradoxical to what we know to be true just because we think it'll make us feel right. Meaning that when almost universally mental health advocates, and I mean actual real mental health advocates,
tucking your dick between your legs,
tell us that gender-affirming care for trans people is safe and it helps them, we have no real reason to refute that, even if it does challenge our beliefs about what a normative gender binary is. And if challenging the social understandings of gender really throws your entire religion out the window, then I don't know what to tell you. I think your idea of God is just too small.
I was honestly baffled by even how Christians were responding to this, going along like we were talking about earlier with the with the pronoun stuff. And I kind of resolved, I kind of decided, and I think this is true, that if our society goes along with this issue, with the transgender issue, if we just swallow that pill, we're lost. Like as a country, as a nation, as a culture, as a society, we're done. We're done for.
If God hates trans people who were born with gender dysphoria, and you truly believe that God formed them in the womb to be this way, then by refuting their questioning of gender, you're actually refuting their creation as being God ordained. In my opinion, there is no space within Christianity for the hatred of any one particular person or type of people. And that means that anyone that hates in the name of God has not truly met God in the first place. And lastly, and I think we should probably finish this video this way because I probably should have ended the last video this way, but I'll say this. If I am wrong, because I theoretically could be, but if I am wrong about the acceptance of gay and trans people by Christianity, then why is that such a problem for those of you who have just a slightly different view? Does this one singular, dissimilar understanding of this one single theological concept really shake your entire worldview so completely? And if so, then why? Because last I checked, every single Christian doctrine is ever so slightly different than all the others. And there are thousands of Christian doctrines. So where is the screaming and shouting about the disagreements over infant baptism or second marriages of divorced Christians? Why is it that this supposed potential sin of people in the LGBTQ community, the one single one that gets you so riled up? What are you actually afraid of? I would genuinely like to know. And again, I ask, is your version of Jesus really so small that you can't even imagine a world where God's love actually extends to the people that you don't like? But anyways, I'm probably wasting my time with that train of thought, so we'll stop there. Regardless of what you believe though, I do hope you found something interesting here. Subscribe if you want to watch more videos that you will certainly disagree with me on about something. And more importantly, whether or not you're trans or gay or straight or something else entirely, remember that I love you all.